Sustainable three-crop rotation does not roll off the tongue, nor is it an idea that can be easily comprehended. Yet sustainable three-crop rotation is at the heart of a transformation in agriculture that started in Saskatchewan about 20 years ago. What is sustainable three-crop rotation, you ask? Well, the three crops are cereal, canola, and pulse crops. The first two you've heard of, but pulse crops, what the heck are they? And you'd be asking yourself, why should you care? Well, the reasons to care are environment, economy, and food security. First, environmentally, pulse crops like lentils affix nitrogen into the soil while growing, which means the field does not have to lay fallow to rejuvenate. And that in turn means a new crop can grow, it can act as a regenerative agent, and at the same time, the crops also capture carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it. Both of these effects are just part of the environmental equation that make pulses beneficial. Economically, the value to the Canadian economy is in excess of $3 billion a year and growing, and that in turn leads to jobs and further economic growth. And the production of foods from pulses plays an important role in ensuring food security in Canada. 20 years ago, Murad Al-Katib realized his home province of Saskatchewan provided a perfect opportunity to supply global markets with the pulse products they wanted and needed. Now, that's not an easy undertaking, especially in Canada. Most pulses are grown in warmer environments around the world with longer growing seasons. So overcoming Canada's more challenging weather is possible thanks to ag tech. At the heart of his business is science and technology. His company, AGT, employs more than 30 researchers who not only grow an abundance of food, they're also producing and milling it in Canada. Plant-based foods that produce protein-rich products that require less land and less water than traditional protein sources. The farms of today and tomorrow employ IT teams to help run efficient and sustainable businesses. Data, analytics, decision support, artificial intelligence, better cameras and drones are all part of the agricultural equation that is enhancing the ability of farmers to produce a bounty of food for a world of more than 9.5 billion people by the year 2050. I invited Murad Al-Katib, the 2017 Ernst & Young World Entrepreneur of the Year award winner, the inspiration behind the extraordinary success known as AGT, to join me for a conversation that matters, Food for Thought episode about the limitless possibilities in Canadian agriculture.
AGT Foods was founded on the guiding principle from producer to the world, buying pulses and grains, including lentils, peas, chickpeas, and beans, as well as durum wheat, rice, and other products from producers around its facilities located in some of the best agricultural growing regions in Canada, the United States, Turkey, Australia, China, and South Africa.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program of the Centre for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the following and viewers like you. Please become a patron at conversationsthatmatter.tv.
Murad Al-Katib, thank you for joining me on this episode of Conversations That Matter, Food for Thought. You know, I have to start by telling you that I am inspired by you. And I'm inspired because you had the ability to find opportunity when many people were saying, I don't know what the future looks like for agriculture in Canada and in particular in Saskatchewan. And this was at a time when markets were depressed everywhere. What was it that gave you the insight to be able to start to say, there's a market here for pulses in Saskatchewan on an international level? What was the germ or the kernel of that idea that made you realize there was an opportunity to create new markets for Saskatchewan-based and ultimately Canadian-based products?
Well, I think it was, kind of an intersection of a number of different trends. I mean, you had, kind of this fundamental population growth story, I'm kind of a student of economics and fundamental theories around supply and demand. And when we turn around and look at the fact that populations were growing, middle incomes were growing, and fundamentally in the world there's a shortage of two very essential elements of feeding people, and that is land and water. So I was a young man in my late 20s, and looking at these fundamental trends and recognizing that, wait a minute, Saskatchewan had this arable land and water base and crops that were emerging as new opportunities. So when I was a kid growing up in rural Saskatchewan, every third field was summer fallow. So we used to grow cereals and canola, and then summer fallow was the black dirt that you would see driving across this country. You'd see all kinds of black dirt soil. Well, that was naturally replenishing soil that was going to go back to growing a cereal grain after it had grown an oil seed. But there was an alternative to that, which was to plant a legume, and the legume being lentils, peas, chickpeas, or beans. So these crops had started in the 1990s, really in the 80s and 90s. But by the end of the 1990s, we had varieties that were proven that they could grow. And these crops fix nitrogen in the soil naturally. So instead of leaving it to summer fallow, you could grow a legume. And we had 15 million acres of summer fallow that I believed could convert into legumes. So, I did what every responsible 28-year-old kid does. My wife was 6 months pregnant with our twins. I quit my $100,000 a year government job, and I moved to the basement of my house with a vision to build a company that could commercialize this.
Yeah, I think you left out an important element there. Your job in Washington, D.C., representing Canada, and you write this letter to the then Premier of Saskatchewan saying, I have an idea. And your letter got through at a time when everything within the Saskatchewan government was going that way, and still they brought you in to find new markets for Saskatchewan agriculture. That must have been a really interesting and slightly unnerving time for you.
Well, it was, the mid 1990s. And if you remember back, in the early 90s, Saskatchewan was essentially bankrupt. And, we had a government change and, really, really tough austerity measures. We were closing, rural hospitals, rural schools. The rural economy in general was really, really in trouble. And, but at the same time, the world was starting to look at, big emerging markets. And, I was in Washington, D.C. in the mid 90s, at the Canadian Embassy. And that's when the U.S. Department of Commerce launched what they called the Big Emerging Markets Initiative. And, looking at that theory that we needed to be where markets were going to grow, unusually fast. And then looking at Saskatchewan, we actually had what the world was demanding. And what that was potash, uranium, agricultural products, oil. We had a natural resources economy. So, yeah, I wrote a letter to Premier Romano, and, fortunate enough that I guess I was a good enough writer that it got through to the deputy minister, to the premier. And as a 23-year-old kid, they brought me in to be one of the ones to lead the trade strategy of our province. And we launched that Emerging Markets Trade Initiative, which I spent 6 years doing in the province. Great time for Saskatchewan.
Along the way, you of course are talking to clients of Saskatchewan products in Turkey who are going, yeah, okay, thank you very much, but what's arriving here isn't clean. And so that's where you saw opportunity. Okay, how do we start to produce this at a level of quality that the world is demanding? And so maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the way that you navigated your way through that. You gave up one job in Washington, D.C., and then you wind up giving up another job with the province of Saskatchewan to go start your own business. It takes remarkable courage to do so.
Well, a couple of things on the courage side. I was young. I had a great education, a US MBA and, good work experience. I figured, if I didn't succeed, I could go work for somebody else one day. And, that's kind of a spirit of an entrepreneur, right?
Right.
But, the fundamental growth of the industry in the late 90s, we were new relatively to the supply of lentils in the world, in particular red lentils, which was 80% of the world consumption was red lentils. And so, the vision was that we could create a quality system, a value adding in agriculture, so that lentils wouldn't become the next mustard story, where we're the world's largest producer of mustard, but we export it all. And then, we turn around and we buy the mustard on the grocery shelf and we put it on our hot dog and hamburger. So, I thought there was an opportunity for us to do more with the crop here. And that was the vision I had. So I went to those Turkish companies that were unhappy with our quality. And one of them, the largest, agreed to be my partner. So, and they're still my partner today, 20 years later. So it's been a good development to recognize that quality parameters, value adding was important. But the Turks had been doing this for decades. So they had market contacts, they had technology, they had some capital. And so that's kind of how we, started up, was bringing that to Saskatchewan. But then, of course, we had to adapt it because,
Right.
the processing of lentils had been done in India and Turkey where it was very warm. And here we were in minus 40 degrees in Saskatchewan, trying to process lentils in the dead of winter. So a lot of technology changes had to happen.
Okay, so then that touches on the topic of technology. How important is technology in the ability to realize this opportunity? Like, without the technology that you now have, would you have been able to, fulfill the market need that clearly you identified and started to supply?
Listen, for us to build from a basement startup to $2 billion in revenue in about a decade, was entirely hinged on technology and process engineering. So our ability to take the world's best technologies, adapt them, apply them to lentils and peas and chickpeas and beans and durum wheat, and then creating those products, uses, ingredients, that the world demanded. That was the business plan. It was a value chain margin capture strategy. So there's an agricultural value chain. We wanted to be participant in every link in that chain. So, again, part of what we do today is we do a tremendous amount of R&D. We are now, producing flours, protein concentrates, starch concentrates, fiber concentrates. So we're taking that lentil and we're splitting it into its components, naturally taking it and separating the protein, starch, fiber, and flours so that each one has a different use. I'll give you a very simple example. Baby food loves lentils because it's high protein. It's a real natural color, right? Red, but babies can't digest the fiber. So what do? We remove the skin, we remove the fiber fraction from the lentil, and we give them a pure, lentil flour or protein that will go into the baby food blend. Increases the digestibility, gives them the natural color still, and gives them the components of the nutrition and vitamin profile that they require. That's the future of our industry, as we look at the everyday consumption of these things. Because they're high protein, high fiber, non-GMO, gluten-free crops. I always feel like I'm bragging when I talk about, the profile of these products.
So you got an R&D department. How many people do you have working in research and development?
Oh, well, we have a full-time R&D center in Saskatoon that has, 9 full-time scientists. And then in our process engineering in our plants around the world, you'd have another, 30 or 40 people that do nothing but just, research, new technologies. We trial, we pilot plant, and we choose and adapt technologies. And that's what's kept us, a little bit ahead of the competition, as we've continued along. And, that technology side is continuing at the farm level as well. I mean, when we look at now, agriculture is no longer just a diesel tractor. We're talking about satellite imagery, GPS systems. We're talking about IoT, the Internet of Things, sensors, data collection, precision farming, where we're placing seed, fertilizer, inoculant at exact precision at specific rates to increase yield. This will all lead to what I would call a traceable food system that's safe and reliable in the future, that likely can be even verified using blockchain. So this is, the future of agriculture. It's what I call agriculture 2.0, that, today contributes around 70 billion in exports in Canada. about another 120 billion in domestic sales, that, we think that 190 billion can grow to 250 billion by 2025 and can grow to 300 billion by 2030. So, you've got a major industry now that's renewable. Let's not forget, this is a renewable resource that agronomy and breeding and farming practices are dramatically taking advantage of that initial thing I had in my head, which is availability of land and water, right? We've got that, and technology is going to change the way that Canada feeds the world.
So when you were talking about the lentil flour, I was also thinking about the fact that you are taking what may have been a raw product and exporting it as a raw resource, and now you're refining it, and so there's value added to that, and so you're enhancing the value of it to the local economy, hiring more people to do that work as well. So the ripple effect of it
value. Absolutely, it's all about that multiplier effect. And if we're able to take crops and we're able to add value, what we're able to do is we're able to increase the lowest common denominator value of that crop when you're looking at it as a bulk commodity export versus an input for a manufacturing process. It's proven in economics that domestic milling and domestic consumption for food processing raises the average price of commodities. And what we want to do is work, we want to work smarter, not harder. And I believe that there are tens of billions of dollars of value out of the current cropping system that we haven't developed because we've had a bulk commodity mentality in this country, probably driven by the Canadian Wheat Board when we had centralized marketing of commodities. I mean, the whole system was based on grow wheat, put it in a rail car, ship it on a vessel out to a miller in the world. Mm-hmm. Well, today, we want to produce, products here that are milled, fractioned, and that protein should go into a protein concentrate use. The starch, can go to Frito-Lay to make a sun chip, which it does today, and the flour can go to make a non-dairy milk, that is high protein and non-GM, for the U.S. consumer that is either, dairy allergy or a desire to have a lower carbon footprint in their products.
So is that a place that you're putting a considerable amount of effort right now in developing plant-based protein products or resources for that market, which is clearly growing in North America? I can't, pretend to understand how it would be around the world, but in North America, there is clearly a growing requirement or demand for that.
Well, before I get to North America, I mean, these products are traditionally, consumed already in Asia. So, if you look at tempeh, and you look at, soy, and you look at, all of the different non-meat meat alternatives in Asia, they've been doing this for hundreds of years. So that market is growing, but definitely, it's what I call the smartphone consumer. The one that grew up with that smartphone in their hands. They have a different desire for knowledge about their food, and they have a different awareness of the environment. I'm 48. I was kind of the first generation of kids that even knew what recycling meant. But today it's fundamentally within their character. They don't know anything different. They want to improve the environment. So plant-based proteins, is not just a fad trend. This is a fundamental trend of consumers. And fundamentally, if we don't actually embrace plant-based proteins, we may not have the water resources in the world to be able to feed 9.8 billion consumers by 2050. Right. So, when I look at the environmental footprint of, producing a unit of plant-based protein versus a more traditional meat protein or dairy protein, you're talking about, fractions, small fractions of the water requirement, to be able to produce that. So, I think that is a trend that's going, and, not only are we spending a lot of effort, but, we've been fundamental in evolving this plant-based food revolution. So, if you go into the supply chain of all the major consumer products companies in the world, you'll find AGT either at the beginning, middle, or towards the end of their supply chain. And that's part of that whole innovation program that we launched over a decade ago, I put about $100 million of capital into building a food ingredient manufacturing plant that's now producing those products. So again, big bet at the time because we were about a decade ahead of the trend.
So, we are very fortunate that we have an abundance of food in Canada. And I read with great interest and tremendous appreciation of you the food that you sent, especially to the millions of people that were fleeing the conflict in Syria. Why is it important that you and collectively we as Canadians continue to support people who find themselves in such dire circumstances?
Well, I think that, it's just fundamentally, us as Canadians, we have empathy and compassion. There's no such thing as social entrepreneurship. There's only compassionate entrepreneurship where entrepreneurs put their wares to use to solve society's problems.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of the Syrian refugee crisis, there were 7 million people displaced. The United Nations, International Red Cross, Red Crescent had to feed them. And they were trying to distribute basic commodities one at a time into a cohesive food system. And what we said was, let's put a family ration together that's balanced nutritionally. Let's produce it, in a very large scale, and let's put them in tamper-proof, secure boxes so that you minimize how much you lose.
We'll never know for sure what the benefit of having provided those people with the meals are, because you can't follow everybody's life. But these are people
Right.
who may not have survived otherwise, and in surviving, they bring innovation and ingenuity to their lives and the communities that they live in, and hopefully contribute to a better world, because we are all interconnected.
I mean, listen, again, that's, part of the big rewarding thing that you get,
Yeah.
out of doing programs that have an impact is, I've had an opportunity over the years to meet, many Syrian refugees that have managed to land and succeed in the next phase of their lives. And, when you have someone come in front of you and say, I was in one of those refugee camps and I was eating the rations, and now they're an entrepreneur themselves and they're employing people and helping to drive an economy, in a rural area of Canada or in a rural area of the Netherlands, it ultimately is just a wow moment.
Say thank you from my perspective for the work that you've done.
As a first generation Canadian, I have an appreciation that, there's a world outside, but a tremendous pride and love for our country. And, that becomes a big advantage as we go out into the world and we participate in global supply chains, is that our partners recognize that Canadians have a good business culture.
Well, your demonstration that temerity isn't needed, that you can be bold, you can dream large and succeed.